Yeah, now it works. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So one more time, just a little background in advance for this presentation of today. I'm coming from a home where my mother she was supposed to work in a bank, and so I had the opportunity as a child already to be able to take some look inside the daily life within this kind of institution. And later on, I was searching my way through different movements, which also led me through what is called the New Age movement, and which I figure out today is exactly the very exact movement which ideas and which mindset is capturing our whole globe. And so for that reason that God in his grace, he led me through these deceptions and through these movements. I was able to recognize these things, and therefore I thought today that we might take a look in this topic, that we might take a look together into this topic. So once again, our presentation today is called, I named it, or I called it, the role of banking in the New Age scheme. And we're going to start with a short video clip.
Such cooperation is a powerful resource in the battle to eliminate new global forms of slavery, born of grave injustices, which can be overcome only through new policies and new forms of social consensus.
One man. What about two? What about six? How about public executions, huh?
Feel free to leave whenever you like, Agent Howard.
Put soldiers on the street and have Americans looking over their shoulders, bend the law, shred the Constitution just a little bit. We do that, and everything that we have bled and fought and died for is over. And they've won. They've already won.
First of all, the integration of national economies into a global economy. That's here. That's done. And so the question is not whether or not there's going to be an international global economy. There is one.
So the question is not whether or not there's going to be an international global economy. There is one.
And we're building an inclusive society in which everybody's got a fair shot. That's how we're going to solve these problems. So we're going to keep on pushing hard to shape an international order that works for our people.
To shape an international order that works for our people.
it goes without saying that part of this great effort is the creation and distribution of wealth.
A new world economy and a new vision for the people of our planet.
Of an economy which seeks to be modern, inclusive, and sustainable.
Okay. And before we now gonna jump into the story, which we wanna hear now, I want to ask you to let's open the Bible together to read some scriptures. So in Revelation chapter 7, verse 2, we read about the great Mediterranean whore. In Revelation 17:2. We're going to read now verse 1 and 2. There it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will shew unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So now it goes on in Revelation 18, verse 3. There the Bible says, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies." So now I'd like to ask you a question. What does the Bible mean when she speaks about the merchants of the earth? Which kind of people does she speak about? It must be about rich people, because this is what the Bible tells us. Political rich people. It must be about politics, because there is usually, yes, of course, there's usually the money. We will speak about the monetary or the banking system in this context. And our next verse is within Revelation. We find within Revelation 17:4. There it says, "The woman having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of a fornication." And now we jump to another quote in Revelation, which says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire." So, this relationship we read over here, this relationship we can read over here in the Word of God. It eventually turns out to be everything else than a story of love, right? And another event of Earth's history, which lays the ground for today's presentation, is the story of the Titanic. And the Titanic was called the unthinkable ship, and everyone thought it would never go away. And there was love stories that have been created around this event, and some of us are maybe familiar with these actors and actresses. But there was, of course, much more behind it, because the Titanic was in fact a story of finance. Because when you look at something of such great significance as the sinking of the Titanic, there is something that has captured the minds of people from the time when the Titanic sank to this very day, more than 100 years later, and people do still analyze the Titanic. They do still analyze this event. And they want to understand why did it sink. So, yeah, and there's many questions which arise. For example, why did the captain had to be warned 8 times as he took off across the waters of the North Atlantic waters that he had been traveling for at least 26 years? Why did he have to be told 8 different times to slow down? Why was it that at that night the Titanic sank? The Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that Edward Smith, he was the captain, apparently lost his ability to make decisions. And why did this happen? And why was it that the Titanic was built just at that time? And who was it that had the Titanic constructed, and for what reason? What was going on in the world at that time the Titanic was built? So, of course, these are many questions we heard now, and for lack of time, we won't be able now to speak about all of them. But who wants to look for a presentation on this whole topic? In this case, you can find it on our webpage. Yeah. So, where the story begins. The Titanic was started to be built around 1909. There was a lot of movement going on, especially in the US, to set up a central bank that had been tried a few times before and had failed. After the Titanic sank, what then went into operation that had such an effect on the world and still has effect on us today? You know, I believe the story of the Titanic doesn't begin in the waters of the North Atlantic Oceans in April of 1912. I believe that it actually began on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia in the Atlantic Ocean. And from the book The Creature of Jekyll Island, we read the following. In 1910, 7 men met on Jekyll Island just off the coast of Georgia to establish a central bank, which they called the Federal Reserve Bank. These men were Nelson Aldrich and Frank Vanderlip, both representing the Rockefeller financial empire. Henry Davison, Charles Norton and Benjamin Strong, representing J.P. Morgan and Paul Warburg, representing the Rothschild banking dynasty of Europe. With the setting up of a central bank, the Jesuits and these men realized that they had a bottomless pit of money to use for wars and to control America by its jugular vein. With a central bank at its disposal, America would become a debtor nation, reduced to a 2-class system and become a third world country. With the central bank in place, the Jesuits could bring America and the world to a time when no man could buy or sell, save he that had the mark of the beast, which we can read about in Revelation chapter 13. Now, in reading about this quote, is it not correct that the US today is the greatest debtor nation in this world, right? Yeah. And do we realize that back in the 1900s, at that time the Titanic was built, and at that time there was a discussion around creating a central bank in the United States, that America was not in that debt at all. There was no debt in the US, but ever since the central bank was established in 1913, America has gradually come into place to be many trillions of dollars in debt. So, these men on Jekyll Island plotted and planned a central bank so that America could come to that place where it would be bankrupt. And that plays right into what Bible prophecy tells us would happen down at the end of time. There would come a time in America and the rest of the world where no man would be able to buy or sell. But in order to create a world like that, you would have to have a central bank in place. Now, the man who actually built the Titanic was this man right here. He was one of the most powerful financiers on Wall Street. His name was J.P. Morgan, or John Pierpont Morgan. He owned what they called the White Star Line. It was a host of fleet of ships, and one of these ships was going to be the Titanic. So J.P. Morgan had his hands in both the establishment of a central bank at the end of 1913, but he also had his hands in the building of the Titanic, because it was his money that actually built it. We read on in this book from The Creature from Jekyll Island, and there it says, banking was not the only business in which Morgan had a strong financial interest. Using his control over the nation's railroads as financial leverage, he had created an international shipping trust which included Germany's two largest lines plus one of the two in England, the White Star Lines. And the Titanic was part of the White Star Lines. So J.P. Morgan built the Titanic, but he also wanted to have a central bank in the United States. Well, we find that J.P. Morgan was connected to a very powerful financial family in Europe, because in the same book we read on page 209, the Morgans were friendly competitors with the Rothschilds and became socially close to them. Morgan's London-based firm was saved from financial ruin in 1857 by the Bank of England, over which the Rothschilds held great influence. Thereafter, Morgan appears to have served as a Rothschild financial agent and went to great lengths to appear totally American. So, what we see in this whole story of the Titanic is you've got a ship being built, but at the same time it is being built, you have these powerful financiers in the world. The Morgans, the Rockefellers, and the Rothschilds, all together planning a central bank in the United States. But they obviously knew that there would be people that wouldn't want a central bank in America. So, what would they do? How would they eliminate people that wouldn't want to go along with that plan? There is another very interesting book from which is called Rulers of Evil, from F. Tapasossi. And there it states, aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered that they bear the title Guardians of the Papal Treasure. The appointment of Rothschild gave the black papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? So yeah, here we see again the 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia described the Rothschilds as the guardians of the papal treasure. So, what we can see here from all this information now, we can see this kind of pyramid structure, where we have these international bankers, but over them, on top, over them, there is another organization, which is the order of the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church, which is, through its different organizations, actually ruling and dominating this world today. Yeah? And some point that I want to mention, especially now, is because we will hear about it in the next presentation. Then we're going to take a look at how the New Age movement is playing into this whole system. Yeah? But right now we will go on with our story that just lays the ground for what's coming next.
Excuse me, can you just read the squares?
You mean this one? Ah, sorry.
Squares underneath.
You mean this one, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can read it. Of course.
The squares. Which organizations are?
Which organization it is? There are? Okay. So, in this whole pyramid, there is, for example, there is the Illuminati, there is the Council on Foreign Relations, there are the international bankers, there is the Mafia, the Club of Rome, there is Opus Dei, the Masons, and the New Age movement. Yeah? Yeah, okay. So, here this is from the book, The Vatican Billions, from Avro Manhattan, and there it says, the Catholic Church is the biggest financial power, wealth accumulator and property owner in existence. She is a greater possessor of material riches than any other single institution, corporation, bank, giant trust, government, or state of the whole globe.
We don't agree, but it's a fact. Yeah.
It's a fact.
It's a fact.
Yeah. The Pope, as the visible ruler of this immense amassment of wealth, is consequently the richest individual in the 20th century. And no one can realistically assess how much he is worth in billions of dollars. Yeah? So this was this quote now, yeah, from the book The Vatican Billions. Okay. Just a second, I will go back again one more time. Yeah, to make a bridge now, to make the bridge again to our story. We see that, so we can see that the Catholic Church, together with J.P. Morgan and the Rothschilds, had their hands in the building of the Titanic. Yeah. Yeah? Okay. So now, this man is a Jesuit priest, and his name was Francis Brown, which boarded the Titanic. He actually shot photos on the people, from many people on the ship, and provided them for the National Geographic magazine.
Excuse me, did you mean he boarded the Titanic? He was in the Titanic.
He boarded the Titanic.
He boarded,
Yeah. So we come back to the book, The Vatican Assassinations. I think we mentioned it already. There it says about this man, it says, a vacationing priest, Father Francis Brown, caught these poignant snapshots of his fellow passengers, most of them on a voyage to eternity. The next day, Titanic made her last stop off the coast of Queenstown, Ireland. Here, tenders brought out the last passengers, mostly Irish immigrants headed for new homes in America. And there, the lucky Father Brown disembarked. So in other words, he went from the ship. Father Brown caught Captain Smith peering down from Titanic's bridge, poised on the brink of destiny. This is something we can read in the National Geographic magazine with the title The Secrets of the Titanic. The book goes on to say, here is Jesuit treachery at its finest. The provincial, Father Francis Brown, he was the highest ranking Jesuit from Ireland. He boards the Titanic, photographs the victims, most assuredly briefs the captain concerning his oath as a Jesuit, and the following morning bids him farewell.
It was all planned.
It was all planned. Yes.
To hit the iceberg, yeah.
Yeah.
This is
It was all planned, and there was a.
right.
Of course, we read here that there was a there was a visitation from this very highest Jesuit priest, which had spoken to the captain before. Probably what have to be done in order to sink the ship. So this is the This is the captain, and his hands were obviously on the Titanic, and he had worked for J.P. Morgan for almost 2 decades. It was at least 20 years, and you don't rise up as a captain of this fleet of ships that J.P. Morgan owned unless you are willing to follow your master and whatever he tells you to do. So what we see here again is this pyramid with the captain, with J.P. Morgan, the Rothschilds, the Jesuit order, and the Roman Catholic Church. All together planning the destruction of the wealthiest men of that time, which would be on board of that ship, and many of them would be opposed to the creation of a central bank in the United States. There is a shocking statement from the book Secret Terrorists, which says, on board the Titanic that night, Edward Smith knew his duty. He was under oath. The ship had been built for the enemies of the Jesuits. After 3 days at sea, with only 1 pair of glasses for the bridge, Edward Smith propelled the Titanic full speed ahead, 22 knots, on a moonless dark night through a gigantic ice field, nearly 80 square miles in area. Edward Smith did this despite at least 8 telegrams warning him to be more cautious because he was going too fast. Did Edward Smith need 1 caution? No, he had been traveling those waters for 26 years. He knew there were icebergs in that area, but 8 cautions did not stop this man who was under the Jesuit oath and under orders to destroy the Titanic. So, RMS Titanic sank in the early morning of the 15th of April 1912 in the North Atlantic Ocean. A final warning was received at 10:30 in the night. In this night, many poor Catholics, Protestants, and Irish immigrants, which left Europe to find a new life in America, lost their lives in the cold waters. 3 of the wealthiest men on the whole planet, which also died that night, were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor. Next to many other multi-millionaires. Again, we read from the book The Secret Terrorists. There were a number of very rich and powerful men who made it abundantly clear that they were not in favor of the Federal Reserve System. J.P. Morgan was ordered by the Jesuits to build the Titanic. This unsinkable ship would serve as the death ship for those who opposed the Jesuits' plan for a Federal Reserve System. These rich and powerful men would have been able to block the establishment of the Federal Reserve, and their power and fortunes had to be taken out of their hands. They had to be stroked by a means so preposterous that no one would suspect that they were murdered, and no one would suspect the Jesuits. The Titanic was the vehicle of their destruction. He foretold it. There was a man, and there was a book which came out some years before this tragedy, and it was called The Wreck of the Titan, and it was a novella from 1898 written by Morgan Robertson. The story features the ocean liner Titan, which sinks in the North Atlantic after striking an iceberg. The Titan and its sinking have been noted to be very similar to the real-life passenger ship RMS Titanic, which sank 14 years later. So, how is it possible for a man to know these kinds of events in advance and to write a book out of it? And long before it comes to happen, when those events were not planned long time in advance. Yeah? In the book The Great Controversy from Ellen White, we read that the Roman Church is far-reaching in her plans and modes of operation. She is employing every device to extend her influence and increase her power in preparation for a fierce and determined conflict to regain control over the world, to re-establish persecution and to undo all what Protestantism has done. So we had the thinking, and in the elections that followed for the presidency of the United States, a Princeton president with the name of Woodrow Wilson was elected into office. And as soon as he got into his place in 1913, he and his crew started making plans for the Federal Reserve Act, which was passed in December of 1913. And so by December 1913, a central bank had been established in the United States, and the plan to finance war, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and the wars in the Balkan. Don't let us forget on the War of Terror. The money was now all in place. And the plan to make America the greatest debtor nation begins in earnest. So when we read about these things, maybe the question arises if America is under siege or under attack. I think it was plainly now through the books we heard about that there is some kind of plan, some kind of movement in this direction is actually going on. And for those people who will maybe call this a conspiracy theory, we will take a look for the people themselves, yeah? To see what these people are telling in their words. So we do have here David Rockefeller, and out of his book Memoirs, we read the following statement. Some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One word, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. So, there is one man, there is one of those many other men which opposed these systems, which opposed these plans, and we know that he got shot. Yeah. So there is a statement of him, of President John F. Kennedy, which says there is a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child, and before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot. He was shot in Dallas. Actually, on the way to speak about this, to tell the people. Yes. Yeah.
Everybody opposed will be shot, right? He will also be shot.
So this is a thing from the past, and we're gonna take a short look into the present moment, and let's see if there is maybe another one which intends to oppose this system.
No, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy. So you could say that, well, that's a lot of safety, actually, and it is a lot of safety, and it gives you a lot of margin. But I think the Fed has gone crazy.
So we know now what Mr. Trump, which is actually the President of the United States, what he's saying about the Federal Reserve System, or at least what he's saying about it officially. And just recently there came out some articles where he seemed to be in opposition, yes, to this very system. Yeah. And when today's President Donald Trump really wants to make his slogan, "Make America Great Again," to become a reality, then he would also need to make a stand against that giant of the present. Now, as students of prophecy, we can know that the United States will actually play a very vital role in last days' events. So there we read in Revelation 13 and verse 15, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." So we can know that this is speaking about a relationship or a mingling of church and state, which will actually lead to persecution. Yeah. And which will actually lead again to persecution, and yeah. In Testimonies for the Church, we read the following statement: "The days in which we live are solemn and important. The Spirit of God is gradually but surely being withdrawn from the earth. Plagues and judgments are already falling upon the despisers of the grace of God. The calamities by land and sea, the unsettled state of society, the alarms of war are portentous. They forecast approaching events of the greatest magnitude. The agencies of evil are combining their forces and consolidating. They are strengthening for the last great crisis. Great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. Now, of course, we know that the nature of this whole battle is of a spiritual nature, and that our enemies are not of carnal nature. So, we have been warned. For in Matthew chapter 24, it says, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." So, this verse, it speaks about a coming deception. In other words, in our context, I would say it warns us, the Bible warns us, that there is another iceberg in front of us. Deception is always about misleading people from the truth. Yeah? But we have a sure word of light that's able to keep us on the right track, and that's able to keep us from these very deceptions which are played out evermore in front of our eyes. So this was just a short look, like a foundation or the ground, yes, to know about what we're gonna see in the next presentation in all of this topic, so that we may know what it means when we hear about a Federal Reserve Bank. And so this presentation is going to be continued, and until we meet us again to take a look about the agenda behind the agenda, may God bless you.